Okay, this is going to be the Lutheran Seminary Complex Part 1. And to talk about this complex, we're going to talk a little bit about the late 17th century. Um, in the late 17th century, Martin Luther had already what he called reformed the church. And up to that point, there was really only one denomination, and that was the Roman Catholic Church. Martin Luther, having some issues with the Roman Catholic Church, decided to do and start a reformation. He would later regret that in his own words. But beginning in the late 18th century, a lot of these waves of European settlers flooded into what is today Pennsylvania, which was then William Penn's colony. Okay, and by the 1800s, or what we call the 19th century, Lutheran leaders, followers of Martin Luther, realized that they needed institutions that would need to address the religious needs of the congregations that were starting in these settlements all around what we know today as the East Coast: Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, New Jersey. So it was decided that a Lutheran seminary was needed. And in 1826, the town of Gettysburg, or Gettysburg rather, was chosen, which was called Gettystown previous to 1800. But 1826, Gettysburg was chosen over two other sites as the house for the Lutheran Theological Seminary. And there was a building that sits at the corner of West and High Street in that direction over there that was the one of the first structures of the seminary. In 1832, this location that's in front of us here was chosen, and they added two professors' homes in the ridge. And we're going to walk along this trail here today, which is today the walking trail. And I'm actually going to start around 3,000 steps on my Fitbit because I'm also going to get some exercise while I'm doing this. We're going to begin here at the egress that leads up to the seminary building, the main building. And we'll walk along this, but I do want to point out that originally this went in this direction where you see the road today. And there are some photographs which I'll post that go all the way out to the Chambersburg Pike there, and it was once lined by trees on each side, which today it still is. Most of the trees are not original. There is a witness tree down at the very end of the road on the left, and then there is one large one here on our left as we turn in this direction. So this has been the Lutheran Seminary Complex Part 1 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate on YouTube. Seminary Complex Part 2 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate. I do want to mention that the reason I'm doing this video today is not just to get some exercise, but also I've received a lot of Facebook messages about how people missed my videos. I haven't done as many videos in the last 2 years as I did in the previous 3 or 4 before that. Things have changed, and I've moved out of the area a little bit, even though I still own my home here in Gettysburg. But I don't get back as much, and I've just been busy. But I always will and do love Gettysburg, and I will always be back here, and I'll begin to shoot some more videos too. One of the trees, as you can see these smaller trees here, one of the trees that is an original sits right here in front of us, this large one. And there are a few trees along the way that are witness trees. I'm going to point them out. Now, as we close in here on this egress, we're going to get to the main building, which became a hospital after the fierce fighting around this very complex here on July 1st of 1863. And we will talk a little bit about the building as we move on. And I'm going to take this, and I'm actually going to use some information that's on the walking trail signs, as well as interjecting my own views as well. So we're going to end this here as we start to go through the egress and see the main complex building. The cupola, of course, used as a lookout during the Battle of Gettysburg. We know that John Buford, John Reynolds met here and may have used that cupola as well to view the battle on July 1st, 1863. This has been Lutheran Seminary Complex, Part 2 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate on YouTube. Complex here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook, Part 3, and we are looking at the original 1832 building that was constructed under the leadership of the Reverend Samuel Simon Schmucker, and later on we'll take a look at his house. It was a federal style building, and it was the home for the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Gettysburg. And of course, as I mentioned in my last part, in 1863, July of 1863, as the battle came to Gettysburg, and on July 1st, it raged around this complex. This building became a military observation post. It was a strategic artillery position, and later became a field hospital that cared for over 600 wounded men. So this is the main Lutheran Seminary building here, and it was again under the built and constructed under the leadership of the Reverend Samuel Simon Schmucker, and we'll take a look at his house in a little while. This has been part 3 of the Lutheran Seminary Complex here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Lutheran Seminary Complex Part 4 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. In its inaugural year in 1826, the facility started with around $1,700. And they actually had started their mornings at 5 o'clock in the morning, every morning, the students, the seminarians as we call them, with worship at 5 a.m. And they were very, very, very strict here. Though there was no tuition at this college, the seminarians were held to a very strict religious and moral code. They started early in the morning with worship, and they attended their classes throughout the day. And there were some small periods of time that were given for physical activity, exercise, as well as chores. And the students did beg for more time during the day, free time, but it was denied. Now the building that we're looking at here was built in 1894 and 1895, and it's called Valentine Hall. It was not here during the Battle of Gettysburg. It was designed by the architect John Dempwolf, and it was designed to serve all the main functions: classrooms, library, faculty offices, dorm rooms for students. And its construction marked a period of a steady physical expansion, which began under the man named Milton Valentine, from whom it is named. He was a distinguished Lutheran theologian and the 4th president of the Lutheran Theological Seminary here in Gettysburg. This has been part 4 of the Lutheran Seminary Complex here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. This is the Lutheran Seminary Complex Part 5 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. This was the home of Samuel Simon Schmucker, and he was the founder of the Lutheran Theological Seminary and the nearby Gettysburg College. He guided the school through its very early years, and of course through the American Civil War. He was very intelligent, energetic, well-educated, and he was a deeply religious man. His life was full of power. For over 40 years he was in control here, and one of his contemporaries observed that he never knew a man who needed and took less relaxation from the severe mental toil than he did. He was the leader of all Lutherans in America at one time, and he authored more than 40 publications on theology, church history, and philosophy. He had very progressive religious views, and his opposition to slavery made him a lightning rod for controversy, not only within the church, but during the American period of the American Civil War. As the most visible leader in the Lutheran religion in America at that time. You know, he was a lightning rod for controversy. He retired in 1864, and after his retirement, one reporter proclaimed that he knew very few men that had accomplished more for the good of the church and the welfare of society than Samuel Simon Schmucker. And we're going to walk around here at the Schmucker house and just kind of get a view of it, because there is one thing that not a lot of people know when they come up here on the Lutheran Seminary complex, but this is one of the buildings that has battle damage to it. And when I mean battle damage, there is an artillery piece that struck this building during the Battle of Gettysburg. And of course, it's not where it actually struck. It's in this spot, but it was cemented into the brick wall as a memento after the battle. And if you walk around the side here on Springs Avenue, the Springs Avenue side, and you go to the front porch of the Schmucker house, just to the right of the door, you'll see the American flag there, and just above it, you'll see the battle damaged building with the artillery piece here in the wall. And this is one of about 10 buildings in Gettysburg that have battle damage that was preserved in some fashion at the Schmucker house. Also, I do want to point out a thing or two in my next video. So as we pan back to the Simon Schmucker house, again, seeing the battle damage, this has been part 5 of our series on the Lutheran Seminary complex on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Seminary complex here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook, Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate on YouTube. And I said I wanted to mention a few other things about this house. It was erected in 1833. It was the president's house. It was the president, Professor Samuel Simon Schmucker. It was also used to house runaway slaves in the Civil War era. They received temporary shelter in a nearby barn before they continued in their journey further to the north. Schmucker, again, as I mentioned in the last part, he wrote and he preached against slavery. Quote, "God has of one blood created the nations to dwell on the face of the earth, has endowed them all with certain unalienable rights and obligations such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All who fail to labor for the extinction of slavery are guilty of sin." Unquote. Now, when Confederate troops marched toward Pennsylvania in 1863, Schmucker learned that the approaching Southerners planned to arrest him. He suspended his classes. He fled to York, Pennsylvania. Upon returning to this house after the battle, he received a very great shock. The house he occupied was most damaged, wrote Samuel. 13 cannonballs or shells pierced the walls, and everything in my house was either broken open by the rebels, and the contents were scattered promiscuously with my books, papers, letters, etc. Some evidence remains, as I had mentioned earlier, the artillery projectile embedded in the south wall of the house, directly in front of us there on the porch. One other thing I do want to point out and mention here is another little known fact, and it's not really a part of the walking trail, but it's important to point out to you, is that on the Lutheran Seminary complex, the oldest tree in Gettysburg, bar none, is on this complex. And it is that very large tree right here. That oak has been dated by some to around 1685, which would make it just over 330 years old here in 2017. And it is amazing, considering that on the first day's battlefield, exactly how much artillery shells and mini balls, lead, millions of pieces of lead flying through the area. That tree not only survived that, but just time itself, and over the years of windstorms and hurricanes and tornado and whatever else has passed through the Gettysburg area in the last 330 years. So again, this is the oldest tree in Gettysburg, standing here proudly just across from the Samuel Simon Schmucker house here in Gettysburg, dated to somewhere around 1685, making it just over 330 years old here in 2017. This has been the Lutheran Seminary Complex Part 6 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate on YouTube. Of the Lutheran Seminary Complex here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate on YouTube. And as we mentioned, as we look at the other end of the Schmucker house, as we mentioned in our last part about runaway slaves and African Americans here, I do want to point out that a famous man named Daniel Payne, he was born a free person of color in Charleston, South Carolina. And he came to Gettysburg Seminary here in 1835 to study theology after a law prohibiting the education of slaves forced him to close his school and abandon his teaching. With his arrival here in 1835 on the campus, he became the first African American to study at the institution. In addition to his classes, Payne participated in the Student Mission Society. He organized Sunday school classes for black children, and he established a moral and mental improvement society for women. Upon leaving the seminary in 1837, he was licensed and later ordained by the Lutheran Franken Synod and served in the Presbyterian Church in Troy, New York. In 1841, he transferred to the American Methodist Episcopal Church, where he served as a parish pastor, historian, and later bishop. With his election of president of Wilberforce University in Ohio in 1863, he became the first African American to lead an institution of higher education in the United States of America. Payne was one of the seminary's most distinguished alumni, and he was also a poet, a hymn writer, a translator, and a Eucharist. And again, Payne studied here on this campus, seen these very buildings, probably walked or maybe even sat under this very tree. And that's something that's important to know and important about the beauty of the town of Gettysburg. This has been part 7 of the Lutheran Theological Seminary Complex here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate on YouTube. Lutheran Seminary Complex, part 8 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. And I am standing at the other end of the main building that was built in 1832 that we talked a little bit about in parts 1 and 2. And I'm going to talk about its role as the field hospital here in July of 1863 as we look at the entrance. Now, from the very first shots of the Battle of Gettysburg, this building became a refuge for over 600 wounded soldiers. It was used as a field hospital, and it remained that way until mid-September, treating over 600 wounded Union and Confederate soldiers inside and on the grounds. It was a ghastly sight to see some of the men lying in pools of blood on the bare floor. Nights and days were alike spent trying to alleviate the suffering of the wounded and the dying, wrote young Lydia Ziegler of her experiences here. Following the battle, medical personnel struggled to save lives with a limited staff and severe shortages of food, instruments, and supplies. Truly an amazing building with a lot of history, including that of the Battle of Gettysburg, especially the first day Battle of Gettysburg, here on July 1st of 1863. Now, the brick part is the original building. Now, this little portico here that you see in front was actually added in 1914. It's called the Peace Portico. And this was added as a memorial to those who treated and created a proper and created a proper entrance to replace which had been here for nearly a century, the building's back door. So this little portico is actually in tribute to those who treated here at the Battle of Gettysburg. This has been the Lutheran Seminary Complex, Part 8, here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate on YouTube. This is going to be Part 8B here at the Lutheran Seminary Complex here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. And I'm standing on the side of the main building and right next to the Civil War field hospital wagon. And we're going to talk about one particular story that's also depicted if you go into the museum, which this building is today. And it was here near this spot on the afternoon of July 1st, 1863, as Union troops headed from this direction swept through the complex here, that Lieutenant Colonel George F. McFarland of the 151st Pennsylvania Volunteers, the school teachers' regiment, fell severely wounded as a deadly Confederate crossfire swept across Seminary Ridge. He was struck in both legs and he fell instantly. A private named Lyman D. Wilson of Company F of the 151st Pennsylvania Volunteers picked up and hoisted McFarland up and carried him to the north end of the seminary as rebel forces approached from the west. McFarland recalled, "I lay on the floor in my blood." Late on July 3rd, he was placed upon a makeshift operating table and his right leg was amputated just below the knee. Following the Confederate retreat out of Gettysburg on July 4th, 1863, his wife and 2 young children traveled here to Gettysburg to be by his side and care for him. The seminary hospital provided shelter and comfort for the wounded from both sides until September 16th, when George McFarland was the last patient to leave the hospital. His story, as I said earlier, is depicted in the museum on the 3rd floor exhibit. Although his war injuries crippled him for life, McFarland later served as the first superintendent of the Pennsylvania Soldiers Orphan School System in McAllister, Pennsylvania. And today outside of the museum is this Civil War era field hospital wagon, which was like the ones that were used during the American Civil War, and probably like the one that McFarland traveled or used, or his men used, from the 151st Pennsylvania, that were able to get into these types of vehicles, you know, in the melee of battle. And again, this is a museum today. I know it runs around $30 to get in and view all the exhibits, and actually also to go up into the cupola at the very top. This has been Part 8B of the Lutheran Seminary Complex here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate on YouTube. Seminary Complex Part 9 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. And here we're going to talk about the defense, the Union defense of Seminary Ridge. Severely outnumbered, Union troops purchased time defending Cemetery Ridge with their allotted lives on July 1st, 1863. By 4 p.m., the battered survivors of the Union's First Corps rallied on Seminary Ridge for a final defensive stand west of town, which is just in front of us. The strongest feature of this position was a semicircular barricade created by the worm fence that was constructed earlier in the day. This was done by troops from Brigadier General Gabriel Paul's brigade, the 151st Pennsylvania, as well as elements of the 142nd Pennsylvania, 24th Michigan, and 19th Indiana manned the works located in the area. Now, during the ensuing attack, a member of this unit recalled there was a gun blaze every minute by the side of my face. Lieutenant Colonel George F. McFarland, who we mentioned in our last video, 8B, was shot and had his horse shot from under him during this fierce encounter. After repulsing several assaults and buying good amounts of time on the first day, the Pennsylvanians were forced to retreat when regiments on their left gave way. McFarland was shot in both legs, as I mentioned, and he was carried into the seminary building there behind us. He remained there until, I said in my last video, till September 16th. He was the very last patient that was discharged from the field hospital. And as I've done in a few of my videos previous, I've actually shot a lot of videos out in this area that you see in front of us. You'll want to go back and watch my extremely long series, thanks to Seward Osborne, on the 20th New York State Militia, which their monument sits over here. You also want to watch my series on the Harvest of Death, which the photos were taken over here. You'll want to go back and watch Forward, for God's Sake Forward, John F. Reynolds at Gettysburg, which talks a lot about this area and also ends with his life just there in the distance in front of us. Very important area here, and this has been part 9 of the Lutheran Seminary Complex here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Complex, part 10 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the cupola here of the main building, which we were just under a few minutes ago, and on the other side earlier as we began the video series. On the late morning of June 30th, 1863, Union General John Buford galloped into town with 3,000 cavalrymen. They established a camp in this vicinity and prepared to defend the town. On the evening of the battle, 13-year-old Lydia Ziegler climbed into the seminary cupola, which you see there in front of you, and observed a number of unforgettable scenes. Below her, many of the Union soldiers solemnly penned letters to loved ones. Others petitioned God for his protecting care. Obviously, Lydia also saw the enemy campfires on the eastern slope of South Mountain in this direction, just 10 miles away. Posted in the cupola the next morning, Signal Officer Lieutenant Aaron Jerome kept his chief in all information to the developments as the battle broke out a short distance to the west. Remember, the first shot of the Battle of Gettysburg was fired about 3 miles in this direction, and the house and the marker are still there. Buford himself was in the Perch when Major General John Fulton Reynolds arrived in advance of his 1st Corps Infantry. According to Jerome, Reynolds inquired, "What's the matter, John?" In response, the gritty cavalry officer, John Buford, replied, "The devil's to pay." The famous cupola used as an observation point during the battle was rebuilt after it was destroyed by fire in 1913. So, as I mentioned earlier, the cupola isn't the original Civil War cupola, but it is a replica of the cupola that was there in 1863. So this has been part 10 of our Lutheran Seminary Complex. A little information about the cupola, a little bit of information about Reynolds and Buford here on July 1st, 1863 on the first day's battlefield. Of the Lutheran Seminary Complex, the battle for McPherson's Ridge, July 1st, 1863. Utilizing the network of low ridges west of Gettysburg, the outnumbered Union cavalrymen commanded by General Buford delayed the advance of Confederate Lieutenant General A.P. Hill's Corps for nearly 2 hours on the morning of July 1st, 1863. Across the fields, in front of you, General Reynolds led a vanguard of the U.S. 1st Corps Infantry into battle as Confederate troops approached McPherson's Ridge. The elevation that you see there in the distance, marked by monuments, Reynolds fell mortally wounded in the action, and where he fell was in this area right here in front of us, and today what we call Reynolds Woods. His successor, Major General Abner Doubleday, that is that gentleman right there on top of that monument, resolved to hold this ground until reinforcements arrived. The battle intensified throughout the day as Confederates launched attacks from the west and from the north, which is to our right. The relentless pressure eventually forced the Union defenders to withdraw as they collapsed from Seminary Ridge and moved in the direction behind us and collapsing back into the town of Gettysburg. Many of the units that were involved in these very actions suffered losses of between 60 to 70% of their original strength when they arrived here. And again, some of the videos that you'll want to go back and watch that I did is videos on Lee's headquarters, the Harvest of Death, the 20th New York State Militia, John F. Reynolds at Gettysburg, the 1st Corps arrival at Gettysburg, and anything associated with the railroad cut, the 6th Wisconsin. This all took place here on July 1st, early in the morning, here in this very area. This has been our next video here in the series on the Lutheran Theological Seminary on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate on YouTube. Lutheran Seminary Complex, and you can see an Alfred Wald sketch of the 14th South Carolina attacking the 151st Pennsylvania just west of the seminary, about right where we're standing. On the afternoon of July 1st, exhausted Union regiments faced new attacks by Confederate units arriving from the west. Confederate Major General Harry Heath used superior numbers to outflank and push the 1st Corps back to Seminary Ridge. The fighting was so intense, with heavy casualties, that Confederate Colonel Abner Perrin's 1,600 South Carolinas advanced directly across the ground in front of us, and they were met by what Perrin described as the most destructive fire musketry I've ever been exposed to. The line of Union breastworks, hastily constructed from garden fences, erupted into a sheet of fire and smoke. Confederate Alfred Scales Brigade, 1,300 North Carolinians, met terribly destructive fire as they crossed the ground in front of us. According to a Union soldier, not a Confederate reached our line. After we had ceased firing and the smoke of battle had lifted, we looked again, but the charging Confederates were not there. Only the dead and dying remained on the bloody slopes of Seminary Ridge. As the Confederates continued to advance, the outflanked and shattered units of the 1st Corps began a fighting withdrawal toward the center of town in that direction. And that Alfred Wald sketch that I showed here in the beginning of this video took place right here on this ground, sweeping in this direction back toward the Lutheran Seminary Complex, which is behind those trees, and into the town of Gettysburg. I do want to dedicate part 12 to a friend of mine, a friend and a man I call my adopted father, Tom Nickerson, because Tom, besides being an Alfred Wald fan, is also a contributor to the Civil War Trust. And I do want to mention that on the 180 view of where I just shot the video is the newly restored Lee's headquarters, without the hotel, without the parking lot, without all the modern obstruction. And that video, which I did a video series earlier this year in 2017, was preserved by the Civil War Trust, and one of the contributors to the Civil War Trust was my best friend in the world, Tom Nickerson. So Tom, this part's for you. And I think I might have one more I'm going to dedicate to you in this Lutheran Seminary series, because I know how much you like Alfred Wald and that sketch, and of course the Lee's headquarters, which you can be proud and hold your head up high that you helped preserve. This has been part 12, the Confederate Assault, here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate on YouTube. As you can hear very quietly in the background, it's 9 o'clock, and the 9 rings of the quiet bells of the Lutheran Seminary will be ringing. But you can hear in the background the birds chirping, and this part of the video, part 13, Lutheran Seminary Complex, I want to talk a little bit about the habitat, not only back during the Civil War, but even today, of Seminary Ridge. It's a beautiful and diverse natural habitat here on Seminary Ridge. It sits 560 feet above sea level, and the ridge is the threshold to the Blue Ridge and the Appalachian Mountains, which you can see here in the distance to the west. The high ground that was of strategic importance in the Battle of Gettysburg has also been of importance for the habitat: hawks, owls, bats, birds, small mammals, insects, and reptiles, alongside the human beings that dwell and visit, including millions of visitors that come here to Gettysburg every year. White oak trees, which we seen the oldest tree in Gettysburg earlier, witness tree, white oak trees that have routinely lived 4 centuries grace this ridge. Hickory, ash, maple, red and chestnut oaks, pines, and Norway spruce trees contribute to a majestic canopy interspersed with fields that have at various times hosted small-scale farming, orchards, and grazing. This video, because of its habitat, I also want to dedicate to a friend of mine, Gregory Gober, who's an expert on trees, and I've learned quite a bit about trees from him, as far as also helping to change my opinion that there are way more witness trees on the battlefield of Gettysburg than first thought of. And I think, as a person myself who loves nature, who loves camping, and who definitely does not like to get pulled over by the police department, but I am one that likes beauty and nature and birds and insects and animals of all sorts, and trees. I have this fascination with trees. I think Greg and myself and lots of others have an appreciation for them. So I wanted to take a little bit of a break of the Lutheran complex and the history lesson and focus a little bit, because I have noticed as I've been shooting these videos, you can really hear the beauty of nature in the background. This has been part 13 on this absolutely beautiful day, except for that person right there, on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate on YouTube. Here, part 14 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield YouTube Ultimate. And we're going to talk about a lady named Elsie Singmaster. Now, Elsie was born on Schuylkill Haven, Pennsylvania, and she came to Gettysburg in 1901, where her father taught and served as the president of the seminary. She was a prolific writer for more than 50 years, and she authored more than 300 short stories and over 40 books. Her stories appeared in such magazines as the Saturday Evening Post, Ladies' Home Journal, and the Atlantic Monthly. 2 of her favorite topics were Pennsylvania Germans and the Battle of Gettysburg. The setting for her novel, Swords of Steel, which was done by Houghton Mifflin Company in 1933, was right here on Seminary Ridge. It was a Newbery Award honored book in 1934. And for many years, Elsie Singmaster Lewers lived in the house which bears her name right there in front of us. She was a prominent citizen of Gettysburg and a highly respected woman of her time. And again, you can see the Lutheran chapel with its steeple that sits next to the original building, which is blocked by trees. And you can also see a house here in front of us, which is the Charles Croft house, which I also did a video on in my Homes and Farms. So if you want to know a little bit about that building and its role on July 1st, 1863, you can go back and review that video as well. This has been part 14. Elsie Singmaster Lewers and her home here in Gettysburg, here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate YouTube. Seminary complex, and our next part is going to deal with this particular photograph right here, one of the most famous images taken during the American Civil War. It's been often titled 3 Confederate Prisoners at Gettysburg. And this video is also going to be dedicated to my friend and my adopted father, Tom Nickerson, because I know how much he loves and appreciates this site. It tends to blow his mind. In mid-July of 1863, Matthew Brady and his crew set up a stereoscopic wet plate camera here and recorded what is arguably the most iconic of all Civil War photographs. The photo had been widely reproduced for more than a century when historian William Frazanito divined its location, looking southward towards Cemetery Hill. Despite proclamations to the country over the years, nothing is known. I want to repeat that. Nothing is known about the identities of these 3 men. Okay, there have been many people who have claimed to have been able to identify these men, but they have never been identified. And this photograph, I'm going to walk over to the location where it was taken. And that would be over here. In 1863, when the stereoscopic view was taken, those men would have been against the wood breastworks that you see in the photograph. In the distance, I got to move out of the way here because there's a car coming, but in the distance, on the left-hand side, you would have seen a large, looks like a smoke plume, but what that is that's actually a 95-foot tulip poplar tree that stood out near the Evergreen Cemetery, and you can see that in the distance. And that was actually a key for Frazanito to identifying the photograph, and that tree shows up in many other views. Later, that wooden breastwork was replaced by these. The breastworks were constructed by Rhodes Division of the Confederate Army, as you can see in the sign on July 4th, 1863, and these are reconstructed breastworks of Rhodes Division. So again, this area right here that we're standing in is the site of, again, what is probably the most iconic of all Civil War photographs, dedicated to my friend Tom, because I know how special it is for him to stand here and be here. This has been our next part in our series on the Lutheran Seminary Complex here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate on YouTube. Seminary Complex, we're looking at the back of the Charles Philip Croft house, and I did a video on this already, but I'm deciding to go ahead and do another one now a little bit. Curious townspeople gathered near the seminary on July 1st to witness the Battle of Gettysburg. Confederates who were coming in here, as soon as the fighting began, the spectators and occupants of the ridge ran back into the town. So we have heard in the past about the battle in Virginia of Manassas, how it was the only battle that was townspeople came out in their carriages and watched it. But it actually happened right here on the seminary complex on July 1st. The Reverend Charles Philip Kraut, professor at the seminary, occupied that brick house there that's right in front of us. Like every other structure in the area, it was soon filled with the wounded and dying. Following the capture of the ridge, Kraut and his family were forced to flee westward through Confederate lines to safety. They returned to find their home ransacked and their possessions scattered all over the lawn. On July 9th, Kraut wrote, "After almost incredible escapes from destruction and death raging around us, we are alive and in good health, greatly comforted. Our loss will be very considerable, but we are not sorrowing our losses, but rejoicing in our deliverance." Also, I did want to make mention the small house that's right behind the tree here was the Mary Jane Ardent Thompson was born in that house on June the 30th, 1863. That baby only lived 8 months, and she was named Jane Meade Thompson, and she is actually considered to be, and is, the youngest resident at the Battle of Gettysburg, being just 1 day old. She was born on June the 30th in this house here, and the very next day, the Battle of Gettysburg. So there was an infant during the Battle of Gettysburg born here on the first day's battlefield, here at this house on Route 30 here, Chambersburg Pike. This has been our next part in our series of the Lutheran Seminary Complex on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate on YouTube. In our final part of the Lutheran Seminary Complex here at the Lutheran Seminary, and we're going to talk about the end of the first day battle. By 4:30 on July 1st, 1863, the Union line had been penetrated and broke along Seminary Ridge. A scene of chaos and confusion ensued as Union artillery galloped along the Chambersburg Pike, past fleeing infantry. Suddenly, South Carolinians made their appearance on both sides of the seminary building on top of the ridge. For better security, the retreating soldiers crossed over the pike to the other side of the unfinished railroad embankment, only to find that Southerners were closing in on them in that direction too. And I did cover that very well in my 20th New York State Militia video series. The conversion Confederate forces created a gauntlet that none of the soldiers would ever forget. According to one survivor, the bullets were flying from each side in a perfect shower. The air seemed so filled that it seemed almost impossible to breathe without inhaling the bullets. Now, a photograph that was taken here on this spot by Matthew Brady was recorded by the firm of Matthew Brady in a position about around here from the Chambersburg Pike. It portrays the seminary just 2 weeks after the Battle of Gettysburg. If you look at this modern view that I'm at now, you can actually see the seminary building, and I'm going to move a little bit here to the right, and you're going to begin to see the cupola. And in 1863, that would have looked like this. And today. So again, I want to thank everybody for watching my videos, for continuing to send me supportive messages about wanting to see more of them, even in my absence of not doing them as often as I used to. I want to thank and dedicate this video again to two friends of mine, Tom Nickerson and Greg Gober, for his expert on the trees and the habitat and the wildlife that I so adore myself. And as we end where we began on part one, back here near the egress and the original building, I just want to remind everybody that this is a great place to come and visit. basically what I've done today is I've walked the entire walking trail, the 17-stop walking trail, and and it's about 2,500 to 3,000 steps. If you have a Fitbit or some other kind of a device, such as one of them, and it's a fun thing to do. It's great exercise. You'll burn about 600 calories. So go out there, get yourself a cheeseburger and fries, and then come out here and burn it off with some history. Thank you for watching this video series, Lutheran Seminary Complex. Until next time, I will see you on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook and Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate on YouTube. A bonus part of the Lutheran Seminary Complex, and it's going to focus on the monument here of Martin Luther, the reformer of the church. It has the scripture, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Now, personally, as a Catholic, though my position may not agree with Martin Luther in reforming the church, you know, he did have a reasoning behind why he wanted to do that. And even though later in life he would regret what he did, you know, he was responsible for what we today know as multiple denominations of the Christian faith. And of course, here in Gettysburg, there is a statue to him, and along with the Lutheran Memorial Chapel here, which is even a higher steeple than the original building over here, which we talked about. This is not a Civil War building, but it is a very beautiful chapel. And each hour, the bells ring here for, it's a bell tower outside. And on every hour, these bells will ring, and it's kind of neat. So let's walk over here, and maybe we'll catch them ringing. Now, the Emmanuel Bell Tower was dedicated to the veterans and missionaries who served all around the war. So, and this was dedicated on October the 29th of the year 2014. It actually has a directional on the bottom, true north, south, east, and west, and those bells will ring in just a couple minutes here, right here outside the Memorial Chapel, and they're quite nice. That was dedicated October the 29th of 2014. And we'll listen to them, and that's how we'll end the video. I won't talk once they start ringing. I'll end the video after the bells. And this will be a little bit of a completion to the video series. And I hope in this video series you've learned a lot about July 1st, 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg, the history of the seminary, and the beginnings of the Lutheran denomination in America, as well as here in Gettysburg. I hope you learned a lot about some of the residents and some of the famous people that lived here in the complex. And I hope you enjoy the views in the video that I've taken. And if you ever have a chance to come to Gettysburg and you just want to get out and get some exercise, this is a great area to do it in. Thanks again for watching the video series. In just a minute, the bells will be chiming.